My mom gave everything she had to her new husband, convinced she'd found her destiny. But he vanished with the money, leaving her drowning in debt and a wrecked restaurant, like an old piece of furniture tossed out at the dump. Now she's at my doorstep, thinking I'll be her salvation. But what I'm about to say will turn her world upside down. Let's start from the beginning. My name's Ryan. I'm 23. And if you think my life's boring, get ready for a show. Picture this. My mom, Joan, a woman who used to think a coffee at a cafe was too extravagant, suddenly decides she's going to become a restaurant mogul. No joke. And it's all because of her new husband, Tom, Mr. I know how to make money work. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. Tom's 50, and if there's a way to tell tall tales in style, that's his profession. Tom showed up out of nowhere, all decked out in overpriced suits, going on and on about opportunities, with that look in his eyes like he just closed the deal of the century. He knew exactly how to reel people in, and Joan took the bait instantly. She even called him her destiny. How romantic, right? Destiny in the form of a 50-year-old businessman, with more debt than a real restaurant owner would have. I tried to hold her back. Mom, don't! This isn't your thing, I'd tell her, only to get her. Don't get in the way of my happiness, Ryan. So here I am, watching her pour her last savings into this restaurant, as if it isn't a bottomless money pit, as if Tom really was going to open the best spot in town. So I knew I'd just have to sit back, watch the circus, and wait for the collapse. Then, opening day arrived. Oh, what a sight it was. If I'd filmed it, the video would have gone viral. Imagine, the restaurant's packed, chefs scrambling in the kitchen, waiters darting around like headless chickens. And then the real mess starts. One waiter manages to mix up orders so bad a vegetarian gets a steak, and the carnivore gets a salad with arugula and quinoa. Customers start fuming, and there's Mom, smiling like she's about to get a gold medal for best opening of the year. Out of nowhere, the first customer clutches his stomach, turns as pale as a sheet, and before anyone can react, throws up all over the brand new carpet at the entrance. Just perfect, right? An epic start for the dream restaurant. Mom tries to smooth things over, while Tom, as always, is nowhere to be found. He seems to think his only role is to stand by the door and nod like he's got everything under control. Sure, buddy. And then another waiter, clearly done with the perfect atmosphere, quits and slams the door so hard the glass nearly shatters. Mom's in shock. But me, honestly, I'm enjoying the show. And this is just day one. I can practically feel that this dream business is nothing more than a slow-motion train wreck. To say things went downhill is an understatement. Just a few days after the opening, it was clear that Mom and Tom's restaurant business was already falling apart. Tom, of course, always found some excuse to work for the good of the business outside the restaurant. Apparently, he thought being the boss meant sitting in important meetings and furrowing his brow while everyone else did the heavy lifting. On this particular day, he pulled a classic disappearing act. Vanished like a ghost, leaving Mom to clean up the circus alone. Mom, by the way, looked like she was on the verge of a breakdown, her eyes darting around nervously, her hands shaking. The illusion of being a restaurant owner was slowly but surely turning into the reality of a full-blown catastrophe. A couple of hours after Tom's disappearance, she called me, sounding desperate, asking me to come over. To help, of course, as always. Naturally, I said, fine. But honestly, it was mostly curiosity. I wanted to see how this dream restaurant was continuing its spectacular collapse. So, I arrive at the restaurant. Okay, words can't quite capture how epic the mess was. The customers were clearly unhappy. Complaints were flying left and right, as if they'd paid for a 5-star experience and got, well, what they got. One man was waving his fork and shouting about how his dish smelled funny. Another woman, all prim and proper, called over a waiter to complain that her dessert looked like it had been made from last night's leftovers. In short, the atmosphere was on fire, like a scene from a comedy about disastrous restaurants. The kitchen. Oh, the kitchen looked like a scene from an apocalypse movie. It was pure chaos. They were short-staffed because 2 people had walked out just the day before, unable to handle the ideal working conditions. The remaining chefs were running around like soldiers on a battlefield. Plates of food were everywhere, and honestly, the smell wasn't exactly the kind that would spark anyone's appetite. Everyone was on edge, and tension hung thick in the air. And right around this moment, a rumor started circulating. Apparently, a few customers had already gotten food poisoning. It could have just been gossip, but there was definitely some whispering among the staff about questionable ingredients. Realizing how bad things were, I decided to talk to Mom. She was sitting in the office, looking exhausted, as if the whole world, not just the restaurant, had come crashing down on her. I figured, since everything was already falling apart, it was time to have an honest conversation. "Mom, don't you think something's obviously going wrong here?" Her response was predictable. She snapped at me, accused me of a lack of support, and threw in that I just wanted to see her fail. Seriously? I looked at her and thought, right, of course. This is all my fault. My fault that you chose to partner up with the king of empty promises and cheap tricks. It was a typical evening, the kind when normal people are having dinner or unwinding after work. But not Tom. This guy could easily be the lead in a series about the classic get-rich-quick crowd. So I dropped by the bar around the corner just for a minute to check on our business tycoon. And what do I see? Tom, sitting with some old buddy, looking all pleased with himself, like he's just figured out how to make gold out of thin air. They order another round of beers and start going on about easy money, and I can't help but listen in. Then Tom, grinning like a fox in a henhouse, suddenly brags about his latest success, how he pulled off a quick one with some gullible woman. This guy doesn't even try to hide his nature. He's practically boasting about how his charm worked on some poor victim. And yeah, he's not even trying to hide the fact that he's talking about my mom. I felt my blood boil. Imagine, this guy is literally sitting there, proud of himself for swindling her out of everything she had. I couldn't hold it in and walked right up to him, cutting off his little victory speech about how hardly any effort was needed. "Really, Tom? A gullible woman? Your wife is a gullible woman? Real classy, dude. You're a hero for losers everywhere." He just looks up at me calmly, like I'm nothing more than a buzzkill here to ruin his perfect evening, and smirks. "Ryan, you just don't get what business is. Go mind your own." Business, huh? Of course, I went straight to my mom and told her everything. I flat out told her Tom isn't who he says he is, and that he's out there bragging about his wins at the bar. And what does she do? She believes him instead of me. He smoothly convinces her that I'm just jealous of him. Jealous? Of this guy? It's not jealousy. It's trying to save her from a disaster, and she doesn't even want to listen. Right then, I realized Tom could probably sell sand in a desert. He's that good at manipulating people. Meanwhile, the restaurant was turning into a real circus. The health inspector showed up out of the blue, as if they already knew a disaster was brewing. And what did they find? Total chaos. Violations, filth, and a few ex-employees who'd left behind a royal mess. And when the inspection was done, they left a massive fine. Something we couldn't possibly handle. The restaurant was on the brink of closing, but somehow, Mom decided she was the one who could save it all. So, armed with determination and barely any cooking skills, she becomes the head chef. Yep, the very same woman who can barely make toast and coffee without a recipe. She can hardly remember the recipe for pasta, but now she's at the stove, assuring everyone she'll make it work. Watching this, I realized I was witnessing a train wreck in slow motion. That evening, I decided to drop by the restaurant office. I had this strange feeling that Tom was up to something. Sure enough, I walk in, and there he is, surrounded by a pile of accounting papers, looking like a villain straight out of a low-budget movie. Noticing he wasn't alone, I ducked behind the door and listened in. At first, I thought he was just going over the numbers, but no. Our brilliant businessman wasn't reviewing finances. He was talking with some lawyer. Yes, a lawyer. About a plan to walk away with the money. You should have seen his face as he proudly laid out how easy it would be to leave Mom high and dry, with nothing but debt. Yeah, I'll just tell her everything fell apart, and it wasn't my fault. She'll believe me. She always needs someone to blame for her problems, as long as it's not me." He laughed, like he was telling a joke. When he said, "Leave her with the debts," I felt something boil up inside me. So, what did I do? Of course, I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos of all those papers. Evidence, just in case. I had the upper hand now, and there was no stopping me. Tom went on for another 10 minutes, talking about his plan, and I hung on to every word, thinking only about how this truth was about to blow up my mom's world. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little curious to see her reaction. When I showed her the photos, she looked at me like I'd come from another planet. At first, her face was a mix of shock and confusion, then pure denial. "You set this up, Ryan," she muttered, as if I were the real villain in this story. But then, at some point, I saw her expression start to change. It was like the little worlds and excuses she'd been building were crumbling, one by one. She understood. I could see it in her eyes, like reality had just crashed into her like a freight train. Silence fell. Then, all of a sudden, fury. She jumped up as if she'd just been shocked. She grabbed her phone and started dialing Tom's number, her hands shaking, her voice breaking. And Tom? Naturally, the number was unreachable. The master illusionist had already vanished, leaving only shattered dreams and massive debts in his wake. Now, Mom had nothing left. No husband, no business, just a stack of bills and the fear of facing the consequences of her own choices. After Tom left, the restaurant collapsed so fast it's hard to even describe. It was a total disaster, like a sandcastle washed away by the first wave. First came the flood of food poisoning complaints. By now, the restaurant was infamous in the worst way. People were genuinely afraid to go there, like they'd be handed a hospital ticket instead of a meal. And of course, the financial situation was a catastrophe. Without Tom, who still imagined himself the mastermind behind this business, everything fell apart. Mom was desperate. I'd never seen her so broken. She went from one creditor to the next, clinging to every hope, convinced that if she just found the right person, everything would go back to normal. Her main plan? Take on more loans and mortgage the house. Yep, you heard that right. Our one and only house. She kept telling herself this was a temporary measure, that soon she'd find investors to rescue her business. She sounded so confident, as if she weren't on the verge of bankruptcy, but opening her 10th restaurant in Las Vegas. Of course, I tried to stop her. "Mom, seriously? You can see there's no saving this." But every time I said something like that, she'd look at me with this desperate expression and say, "You don't understand, Ryan. This is all I have left. I have to try." Sure, if by try, she meant digging herself even deeper into debt. In the end, all her moves left her with nothing but a mountain of debt, fines, and a complete lack of the investors she'd hoped would save her restaurant. And then came the day she finally turned to me for money. She tried to guilt-trip me, reminding me of everything she'd done for me over the years. "Ryan, I'm your mother. You can't just sit by and watch me drown," she said. She was counting on me to bail her out, no questions asked. But you know what I did? I said no. And not just a simple no. I explained to her that rescuing her from the consequences of her choices was like trying to treat burns while she kept playing with fire. I was tired of watching her make the same mistakes over and over, expecting someone to come along and pull her out. "Mom, you chose this path. It's your restaurant, your debt, and your decisions," I told her. She looked at me, shocked, like she couldn't believe I'd actually do that. After I told her no, Mom, of course, didn't give up. She tried every trick in the book to get me to change my mind. She started with the most obvious, accusing me of being indifferent and uncaring. It was laughable. She actually thought she could live her whole life doing whatever she pleased and expect someone else to clean up the mess. Well, not with me, Mom. Every time she came to me, it was the same performance. Her favorite line? "Ryan, you don't understand what it's like to be in my shoes." Really? I'd seen enough of her situation to know it was just self-pity, and an attempt to paint herself as the victim. She would switch from accusations to pleas like a professional actor. Tears, resentment, then back to tears. All I could do was wait for her to finally realize that this wasn't going to work. One evening, she showed up again, this time with a fresh batch of grievances. Other family members also refuse to help because they don't understand how much this business meant to me, she said, as if she were trying to convince herself. Oh, so I'm not the only indifferent one. Looks like there's a whole club. I couldn't help the sarcasm. But then she hit me with a new accusation that really got under my skin. You know, Ryan, if it weren't for you, Tom would have stayed. You were always so hostile, causing problems, and eventually, he couldn't take it. You ruined my only chance at happiness. Seriously? She was actually trying to blame me for her con-man husband taking off? It was both absurd and, honestly, kind of funny. Mom still believed she could toss around blame and make someone else feel guilty for her issues. I couldn't help but smile a little at the ridiculousness of it. Oh, so it's my fault he left, huh? Fascinating how much I've managed to do without even realizing it. She looked at me with annoyance, as if I was supposed to apologize. But instead, I just told her it was time to stop looking for scapegoats and start owning up to her mistakes. After yet another argument, I finally snapped. I was done with her constant manipulation and her attempts to make me the villain in everything that went wrong in her life. I took a deep breath and told her straight up, Mom, enough. You need to realize that no one's coming to save you. This chance at happiness of yours was an illusion, and you know it. Stop looking for people to blame and start actually doing something for yourself. She froze, and I could see my words hit home. But I wasn't backing down. And yeah, that was the moment I decided I'd had enough. I showed her to the door, and though her eyes were full of hurt and disappointment, I felt like I'd finally put an end to this endless cycle of manipulation. A few weeks of silence went by. I thought maybe she'd finally realized it was time to take control of her life and learn to deal with the consequences of her choices. Oh, how wrong I was. One evening, she showed up at my door again. But this time, she wasn't the proud woman she always portrayed herself to be. She looked broken. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes hollow, and the look on her face was that of someone who'd finally realized they'd hit rock bottom. Honestly, I'd never seen her like this before. Not confident and self-assured, but genuinely lost. Ryan, can I stay with you? She asked quietly, as if she was ashamed to even be standing on my doorstep. All she was missing was a trembling voice and some sappy background music from a melodrama. You should have seen her face. She wasn't trying to play the strong woman or the wounded mother anymore. She just stood there, looking like, this doorstep and your mercy are all I have left. I could have, of course, shown her some compassion, let her stay, and forgotten all the fights we'd had. But instead of feeling pity, I felt this dark satisfaction. Like she'd finally found exactly what she'd been chasing all these years. And instead of offering her my hospitality, I said the thing I'd been wanting to say for a long time. Mom, why don't you go get a job, like everyone else? I asked, smirking. I knew that would hit her where it hurt. Her face went stiff, and I saw a flash in her eyes, not of tears, but of barely contained anger. It was a blow to her pride, to her self-image as someone special, someone who always thought things would just work out on their own. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me with that expression, a mix of disappointment and resentment, like I was her last hope and I'd let her down. For a moment, I felt like maybe I'd gone too far. But you know what? I held firm, because I knew that if not now, she'd never learn to accept the consequences of her decisions. She turned and walked away without a word, and as I watched her go, I felt like this was finally the end. After Mom left, I expected she might at least try to get her life together on her own, and for a while, I heard rumors that she'd found a place to stay with one of her friends, the one who'd always been there to listen and pity her when no one else could put up with it anymore. You know, the friend who always had a spare room for someone in need. It seemed like Mom had found one last lifeboat in her. But of course, everything went according to the usual script. At first, things were perfect. Her friends supported her, gave her a roof over her head, and even, as I heard, tried to help her manage her debts, assuring creditors that Mom was on the verge of turning over a new leaf. Mom must have put on quite the show, playing the part of someone who just had a little setback. I'm sure her friend even believed her, at least a little. The problem with Mom, though, is that her issues are like a suitcase without a handle. Hard to carry, but somehow too valuable to let go of. As soon as her friend realized that Mom didn't just need temporary help and support, but a complete fix for her endless problems, she quickly grew tired of the burden. In the end, even the most patient person can't keep turning a blind eye when someone is dragging them down. After a couple of months, the friend asked her to leave. That was just the beginning. Word got around, and I found out that Mom was now going on job interviews, trying to find any work she could. She'd spent her whole life thinking she was above the ordinary need to work for money. But now she had no choice. The thing is, though, who's going to hire a woman with her track record? Employers see her age, her long history of trying to find investors, and of course, all the rumors about her restaurant failure, and none of them are eager to give her a chance. Mom found herself unwanted, even in places where all they needed was someone reliable with a little common sense. Sometimes I wonder if maybe it was too harsh to leave her like this, without any help when she really needed support. But every time that feeling creeps in, I remember how many times I tried to help her. How many times I told her to stop, think about the consequences, and look at things realistically. And every time, she ignored me, convinced that she knew best how to run her life. It's like she was living in this illusion that all her problems would just magically disappear one day, and she'd never have to face them. Now reality has finally hit her, hard.